Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News of this Tuesday, the 26th day of November, 2024. And there are two huge stories in the news this morning, two of them that are both developing stories. And we're going to summarize for you right now what they are and try and put them into perspective with respect to last day's Bible prophecy. The first story is the reports of a possible ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah that is said to be imminent. The supposed agreement would not include Hamas or anything having to do with Gaza or the release of the hostages taken on October 7th, 2023. It's just with Israel and Hezbollah. Now, our next story concerns the continual saber-rattling with Russia and the West, Russia, Ukraine, and the West, as it were. There are many doomsday scenarios that are making the headlines right now. We want to give you an update on that, as well as what we know at this time. Each of these stories has a lot to do with respect to last day's Bible prophecy. Israel, of course, is at the center of last day's events, and Russia is the main player in the predicted last day's invasion of Israel. Therefore, we must keep an eye on each of these stories. And so, in doing so, we're going to do our best to say no more or no less with what the evidence of what the truth is, not get histrionic about it, but just kind of put it all into perspective as we see closer and closer every day. We're moving towards the time of the end, as the Bible has let us know ahead of time. Okay, so the five headlines are representative of what's being reported. There are literally dozens of stories on both of these subjects. And so here are five that I've chosen out of these. It wasn't easy, by the way. The first one is the IDF troops to have reached the Lani River in Lebanon for the first time in over 2 decades. But then, headline number two, the Israeli military says it will enforce compliance of the ceasefire deal. Headline number three, from total victory to total surrender, northern Israelis are outraged over reports of Hezbollah ceasefire agreement. Then headline number four, get ready for a wartime scenario in Europe and be wary of Russia and China. This is from the top NATO official. And finally, headline number five, what if Russia strikes back at NATO? What's going to happen? And so we're going to look at these individually and summarize where we're at right now. Like we say, they're ongoing stories. And we want to put these into perspective with you because it's not the last time we're going to be talking about each of these, but they are huge internationally and huge biblically also. All right, the first headline is fascinating. The IDF troops have actually reached the Litani River in Lebanon for the first time in over 2 decades. They have carried out operations in the area of the Litani River in Lebanon, the military said on Tuesday, marking the first time in over 2 decades that IDF soldiers have reached the area. Following intelligence information, troops carried out raids on numerous terrorist infrastructures that have been stowed in the area. Soldiers have reportedly carried out close quarters combat and demolished dozens of launchers and thousands of rockets and missiles. The military added that troops destroyed weapon storage facilities hidden within the mountainside. Okay, so here's what's going on. They've made it the entire 18 miles that was supposed to be the area where no terrorists would be stationed. 18 miles from the Lebanon-Israeli border to the Litani River, and that was supposed to be a no man's land. That was agreed to in 2005 by U.S. resolution, and it was supposed to be taken over by the United Nations and guarded for security reasons, and there'd be no terrorists in the region after the Israelis left Lebanon 2005, 2006. But for the last 20 years or so, it's just the opposite has been true. The Hezbollah has, planted bases there, tens of thousands of weapons there, terrorists there, and then tens of thousands that are in this 20-mile stretch. And so they've done everything which Israel didn't want them to do, but no one enforced this UN resolution. So in light of this, now Israel, what they've done since they've entered Lebanon, recently, they've made the way all 18 miles up until this river, which was supposed to be, the no man's land area. And they've been getting rid of Hezbollah, their infrastructure. Remember, they've killed about 90% of the leaders of Hezbollah too. So they've gotten to the place where basically this area is getting under their control. So one would think, wouldn't we, that carry yourself on to victory, get the entire region, this entire 18-mile stretch, rid of Hezbollah up to the river. But sadly, this doesn't seem to be the case, as our second headline emphasizes. Israeli military says it will enforce compliance of the ceasefire deal. Lebanese international outlets share the optimism that a ceasefire deal is near And here's a real worrisome headline. Iranian leaders support Hezbollah's agreement to the conditions, and the Security Cabinet will convene later today to approve Israel's decision. About 2 hours from now, we're a little after 6 a.m. here in the west coast of the United States. It's at 4 p.m. Israeli time at 5:30, about an hour plus from now. The cabinet will meet, and it seems like they will confirm this agreement that they have made with Lebanon with the help of the United States and France. And this will go into effect fairly soon. And so there's optimism there. The military said they'll enforce the terms of the ceasefire deal, which is expected to come into effect just in a few days after negotiations appear to be nearing conclusion. The Hezbollah affiliated outlet called Al Akbar basically said the resistance and its capabilities remain intact, of whether Hezbollah forces are north or south of the Lani River. In other words, we're still alive. We're still alive and kicking no matter where we're at. So this agreement's going to be great because Hezbollah will still be alive and still exist at this particular time. There will be a special Lebanese cabinet meeting tomorrow that will agree and solidify the deal if Israel's cabinet, security cabinet actually, says the deal is okay. And then supposedly some 10,000 Lebanese soldiers in the next 60 days will replace Israel in this 18-mile stretch. And they will make sure, along with the United Nothing or the United Nations soldiers, that Hezbollah is rooted out of the area. That's supposedly what's going to take place. So the question is, and this is a very good question, in light of Israel's successes, in light of taking out 90% of the leadership of Hezbollah, in light of getting all the way to the Lani River, now that 18-mile stretch, and getting rid of all these munitions, storage facilities, etc., why in the world would they agree to a ceasefire? Well, we're told there are three reasons, this article tells us. First, we aim to prevent as much as possible a UN Security Council resolution addressing both the North and the South. We are in a transitional period for the U.S. administration, and we understand the complexity and sensitivity involved, so we want to avoid that. Why? And here's the key. Once a resolution is passed, it becomes irreversible. Therefore, we're doing everything to prevent it. Well, let me translate what this means. It means the United States is putting pressure on Israel to accept this deal or else. Or else what? There will be another vote then of the Security Council if they reject this deal while Biden is still in office. And what will take place is the nations will vote that Israel must immediately must immediately call a ceasefire in both Lebanon and in Gaza, declare the war over because of humanitarian reasons, et cetera, et cetera. And they will be liable, according to the UN, to fulfill this. Now, the United States usually would veto something like this. They would say, no, which they did the last resolution. But if they don't knuckle under to what the U.S. is telling them they must do now, what will happen is the U.S. won't agree with the resolution. They'll just abstain. They won't vote, which means the resolution will pass. And Israel will be irreversibly held to be against the world body's thoughts with respect to Gaza and Lebanon. That's what they're trying to prevent, because with that can come all sorts of even more boycotts and more, condemnation of Israel from all sorts of capitals around the world. And so they're afraid of that. And so because Joe Biden has forced that in waning days as the president of the United States, and it's sad that we're seeing this sort of thing, but it's not surprising. And all we've said this in the very beginning, that he is not a friend of Israel, no matter what Israelis try and tell you. So this is one reason. This is the main reason why. This is the only reason why they're doing this. Now, they said, well, there's also a need to refresh our forces. Reserve soldiers need a break. And the third reason is we want to sever the connection between Gaza and Lebanon. Maybe we can talk to Hamas and get the hostages out. Maybe we can have a ceasefire there. And that's laughable, too. So anyway, they're trying to put the best face on this, but the bottom line is they're scared to death of a UN resolution that would make them, in the eyes of the world, look like they're, anti-peace, anti-ceasefire, genocidal, both in Hamas in Gaza and then Hezbollah in Lebanon. So this is what's going on. It's terrible. This is the United States, what kind of pressure they put on Israel. Now, obviously, this is not set well with Israel. Headline number 3, from total victory to total surrender. Northern Israelis are outraged over reports of a Hezbollah ceasefire agreement. Residents and local leaders fear emerging truce will allow terror group to regroup and rebuild. It's exactly what they're going to do. What will all residents return to? A devastated city with no security and no future? This is the mayor of Kiryat Shmona. He asked the question. Kiryat Shmona is right there on the border between Lebanon and Israel. What do our people come back to? More threats and more fighting and more bombing eventually from the north. Reports of a progress towards a ceasefire with Lebanon have sparked significant frustration among residents of northern Israel who fear that a potential agreement could allow the Lebanese terrorist group to rebuild and once again threaten their safety. And again, this is supposedly imminent, this agreement. So after more than a year of hostilities, what they're calling for is a decisive resolution that exploits Hezbollah's current weakened state following the extensive Israeli bombing campaign, which has targeted its leadership. In other words, finish the job. Let's get the job done. We're already there at the Lani River now. Let's take over the entire area and make sure it's secure. Then we'll figure out how to keep it secure in the future. But this is not what's going on. So this is where we stand at the moment. Like we said, the Israeli Security Cabinet will be voting a little over an hour from now. They'll be meeting in over an hour from now, and it'll probably take us several hours before they make an announcement. Later tonight, Israeli time, it'll be here during our time during the day, and we may or may not, depending, we may or may not report. It seems like a dumb deal. Tomorrow, if it is, agreed to, we'll talk about what's going to happen with respect to how this all will bear out. But anyway, this seems to be what's going to take place. It is horrible for Israel. It's such a blight again on the United States of America, but this is what the Biden administration has been for the last 4 years, and thank God they're leaving the scene. Now, once we know about what's going on, if anything major takes place, we'll break in and do a second breaking news, but most likely they're going to agree to it. And then tomorrow we'll start talking about how all this will work out. All right, there's another story here. We want to shift our attention a little bit to the West with Ukraine and Russia. And two headlines basically says it all. Get ready for a wartime scenario in Europe and be wary of Russia and China. This is a top NATO official. Now, this is interesting what it says. This can be totally different than what Donald Trump's going to tell the U.S. Europeans must be ready to sacrifice some luxuries to pay for and support Ukraine and prevent a wartime scenario coming to the nations of the continent if they're insufficiently prepared. This is NATO's most senior military officer said in a speech, name-checking both Russia and China as threats. His name's Rob Bauer. He's a Dutch naval official. He's the chair of NATO's military committee, and he addressed a conference at the European Policy Center think tank yesterday, Monday. While he said the alliance is more ready than it's ever been, they delivered a pessimistic message of the need for preparedness of the conflict, and basically says it sounds like the U.S. in World War II. What happened? We got to tighten our belts. We got to give up certain things. We have to realize we're not going to be as financially secure as we want to be because we got to spend that money on Ukraine to make sure the Russians don't, take over Ukraine, and therefore there'd be military expense, this and that, and building up our own armies so we can fight Russia in case World War III starts. Because what we've done so far is depend on the United States. This is the long and short of the article, and we want to get away from doing that, which is really interesting because that fits again last day's Bible prophecy. Europe fighting on its own, the U.S. not being involved, from this particular area in the world. But anyway, so they see the preparations should have been yesterday. We've got to get armies together. We have to have munitions. We need manpower there, and to be able to do that, it's going to cost money, and the money will come from you, the citizens of Europe, to pay for this. Because all we have now is the United States, and the United States is not really thrilled about doing this. And let me tell you, Donald Trump's message will be just the opposite. No, we're not. We're getting out of Ukraine. We're not going to spend any more money on that. We spent billions of dollars. We've wasted that. We need a peace agreement there. We don't need World War III. What's really interesting, there's a lot of leftists that were supporting Biden that say, what in the world is he doing? What's he trying to do? Get us into the Third World War? That's a great question. But anyway, elections have consequences. So that story's in the headlines. We'll follow that. And then finally, there's a headline from Zero Hedge. What if Russia strikes back at NATO? What's going to happen? And what's interesting about this article is one, we won't go into the details because it gets quite detailed here. Most people think it's going to be some type of, it would include a, nuclear long-range strikes from Russian territory on the UK and Europe, and that if there's a war going on. But the article makes it clear Russia, it may be a global war, but it does not necessarily mean nuclear weapons because there is a capability that Russia has, a very strong capability of other weapons that basically conventional weapons that could be used against Europe. They can, reach Europe. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a nuclear war, but it can be messy there. And so they're getting prepared for it. They're worried about it. And you get story after story after story, what we're going to do. And you've got the leaders of France, the UK saying, we're gonna fight Russia if we have to. We're going to stand with Ukraine, but you're all going to have to tighten your belt. It's going to cost you how you live and what you have, because this is important that we do this. So that's where we're at right now. It's really interesting. So these two stories are mere, like we said, are samples. Two headlines are samples of dozens of other stories that we could give you that are now being published with respect to a possible war between Russia and NATO over the issue of Ukraine. Again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we know from Scripture Russia will be a force to be reckoned with at the time of the end. So, what do we have? Summarizing today, two developing stories, the outcome of which nobody really knows except God. There are so many possibilities. We will keep you informed. Now, here's the key. What we do know is how all of this will end up. For the biblical predictions, see our book 25 Signs. We're near the end, and look up a timeline of 50 last days events, two books that we've written, as we document precisely what the scriptures have to say about the future. These books are found on our website, Educating Our World, under the heading of Bible Prophecy, and are free downloads. So a lot going on. We'll just wait and see what happens. We'll keep you informed. I'm Don Stewart again. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.